The sea can turn deadly in seconds, transforming peaceful moments into scenes of horror. From a great white killing a fisherman before his children, to a Greenland shark circling a diver in icy waters, to police divers mauled in Hawaii, and a cage dive ending in tragedy in South Africa. In this video, we'll uncover 6 terrifying true shark encounters that reveal the ocean's hidden dangers. On June 18, 2020, the chilly waters off Gansby, South Africa, stretched wide and restless under the morning sun. Known worldwide as one of the most active great white shark hotspots, the town was home to fishermen who had worked the waters for generations. Among them was Peter van der Merwe, a 42-year-old father of 2. Born and raised in the Western Cape, Peter grew up on the coast, where his father had taught him the fishing trade from a young age. His life revolved around the sea, which provided both his livelihood and a sense of peace. Peter was known in the community as a patient and caring man who deeply cared for his children. He often brought them along on calmer trips, eager to pass down the same lessons he had once learned. His 11-year-old daughter and 8-year-old son loved these outings. For them, the small boat rides meant time with their father, stories of the sea, and the thrill of seeing what might come up on the end of a line. On this particular day, the 3 of them set out in the early hours, their small wooden vessel rocking gently as it left the harbor. The waters shimmered with life. Seabirds swooped above, and the children laughed as they helped their father prepare lines and bait. The calm atmosphere gave no sign of what would soon unfold. After some time, Peter leaned over the side of the vessel to reel in a struggling catch. The rod bent sharply, the line pulling tight. He braced himself, gripping the railing for support as the children watched with excitement. In an instant, the sea beneath them erupted. A massive 16-foot great white surged upward, its enormous jaws clamping down on Peter's leg. The sudden impact snapped the fishing line and splintered the wooden railing in a burst of force. The boat rocked violently, tossing gear and buckets across the deck. The children screamed as they stumbled, clutching the edge to keep from falling overboard. Peter thrashed, striking out with desperate kicks as the predator dragged him toward the water. His hands grasped the railing, his body twisting as he fought against the immense power pulling him down. Foam and spray filled the air as the shark thrashed, tugging him away from the boat. The sound of splintering wood and crashing water filled the children's ears as they clung tightly to the side, terror in their eyes. Nearby fishermen, hearing the commotion, rushed closer, splashing at the surface and jabbing long poles toward the predator. Their efforts struck the water in loud bursts, but the great white held firm. Minutes of chaos followed, the predator tearing at the water in brutal surges. Blood spread across the waves, mixing with the foam as the struggle raged on. The predator eventually retreated, slipping into deeper water, but by then the surface told a grim story. Peter resurfaced briefly, motionless, the ocean around him stained red. His children cried out from the boat, their young faces frozen in horror as they witnessed the final moments of their father's fight. The water calmed only slightly as the predator slipped back into the deep, leaving behind floating debris and a red trail that stained the waves. Peter's body drifted briefly on the surface before vanishing beneath the rolling swells. His children clung to the edge of the boat, their small hands trembling as the cries of panic still echoed across the open sea. The nearby fishermen maneuvered their vessel closer, pulling alongside the smaller craft to shield it from further danger. Several men reached over to steady the children, guiding them safely into their own boat. Their faces were pale and shocked, their eyes wide as they stared at the water where their father had disappeared. The ocean, which had always been a place of learning and joy for them, had, in moments, turned into a nightmare. The rescuers kept watch on the surface, holes ready in case the predator returned, but the dorsal fin no longer appeared. The silence that followed carried a heavy weight, broken only by the sobs of the children and the crash of waves against the hulls. The return to shore was filled with grief. The harbor, usually alive with activity, grew hushed as word of what had happened spread. Medical teams were waiting, but there was nothing more to be done. The children were taken quickly into care, wrapped in blankets, though the sun was still high. Their faces were marked by shock rather than cold. The fishing community gathered, their expressions somber, knowing they had lost one of their own in the most brutal manner. Authorities confirmed the details later that day. The strike had been sudden and violent, carried out by a great white estimated at 16 feet in length. It was one of several aggressive encounters reported that week along the same stretch of coast. Experts explained that the waters around Gansby were known for seasonal spikes in predator activity, as the migration of prey drew the sharks closer to shore. The warning came too late for Peter, whose trip with his children had ended in tragedy. The aftermath weighed heavily on those who had witnessed it. The fishermen who tried to drive the predator away spoke of how helpless they felt in the face of such power. They described the scene as one of the most terrifying moments of their lives, far worse than storms or accidents at sea. For the children, the trauma of watching their father taken remained sharp. Though physically unharmed, their young lives were forever altered. In the weeks that followed, tributes were held in the community. Friends and neighbors supported the children, ensuring they would be well cared for, despite their father's absence. The story spread beyond the small town, serving as a chilling reminder of the risks that come with life on the water. Even for those with generations of experience, the ocean held dangers that could not be controlled. The image of that day lingered long after the waves settled. It became a story told again and again, not just of loss, but of the brutal force of one of nature's deadliest predators. On March 12, 2024, the frozen world of Svalbard, Norway, lay beneath a pale Arctic sky. Ice sheets stretched across the horizon, and the frigid waters below hid mysteries few had ever seen. Among the small group of explorers working in the region was Erik Johansson, a 34-year-old diver from Oslo. From a young age, Erik had shown a fascination with the sea. He spent his childhood exploring fjords and later pursued a career in marine biology at university. Over the years, his passion grew into a career, combining research with filming projects that brought the hidden life of the deep to a wider audience. By 2024, Erik was well respected in the diving community for his work in extreme environments. He had completed expeditions in the North Atlantic, the Barents Sea, and even beneath Antarctic ice. Known for his calm nature and careful planning, he was trusted to handle conditions that few others could endure. The Svalbard mission was part of a documentary project aimed at capturing rare marine life in one of the world's most remote ecosystems. That morning, Erik prepared carefully. He donned a thick, dry suit, double gloves, and multiple layers of insulation to withstand water temperatures that hovered near freezing. His breathing gear was checked numerous times, and the camera rig was secured to his chest. With each careful step, he lowered himself into the icy water, bubbles rising around him as he sank below the surface. Visibility was poor, the dim Arctic light barely reaching beneath the layers of ice. The seafloor appeared only in patches, a mix of ridges and rocky outcrops. Erik moved slowly, his camera capturing drifting jellyfish and small fish darting between the shadows. The silence of the deep surrounded him, broken only by the steady sound of his breathing. Then, from the darker blue beneath him, a shape began to take form. At first, it was only a shadow, broad and slow, but as it drew closer, its size became clear. A Greenland shark, estimated at nearly 15 feet in length, emerged from the depths. Its massive body moved with deliberate slowness, its pale eyes fixed on the diver. Known to live for centuries, these predators were rare to encounter and rarely aggressive. However, their size alone made them a formidable threat. Erik's pulse quickened as the shark began to circle, its presence commanding the entire space around him. The enormous creature brushed close, its rough skin grazing against his flippers. The current from its body pushed him sideways, sending his camera rig knocking against the rocks. Erik steadied himself, careful not to make sudden movements that might draw further attention. Still, the shark pressed closer, nudging him toward a rocky ridge. The sensation of its mass, the sheer power hidden in its slow motion, filled him with dread. Every instinct urged him to flee, but he held steady, kicking gently as he began backing toward shallower water. The shark turned again, its massive head passing only feet away from his body. The giant form lingered, circling with steady precision. Its tail swept in wide arcs, stirring the cold water into heavy currents that rocked Erik against the ridge. He pressed his fins carefully, keeping his distance while every second stretched into eternity. The predator's movements were slow but purposeful, each pass closer than the last. Its blunt snout brushed the edge of his camera rig again, forcing him to adjust and hold balance. The diver's heart pounded inside his chest, his breath echoing loudly in his ears. He knew that any sudden strike could crush him instantly, yet he also understood that panic could worsen the danger. He pushed gently away from the rocks, inching toward the lighter blue above. The shark followed, tilting slightly as though curious, its pale eyes fixed on him. For a moment, its vast body blocked all sight of the open water, its sheer size overwhelming the narrow channel of visibility. Another pass carried it close enough for its rough skin to scrape the edge of his fin. The sensation jolted him, reminding him how little stood between survival and disaster. He steadied himself, careful to keep movements deliberate, edging toward the brighter shallows. The massive shape curved again, but this time it began to sink, drifting downward with unhurried ease. Its shadow stretched long across the rocks before fading into the darker water below. Eric remained still for several moments, scanning the depths, half expecting the form to rise again. When the shadow did not return, he began a slow, cautious ascent. Each kick was measured, careful not to disturb the water too much. At last, the surface shimmered above, and he broke through the icy layer, gasping as cold air filled his lungs. His team hauled him back aboard the support vessel, his body trembling not from the temperature alone but from the weight of what he had just endured. On deck, the encounter sank in. The camera rig still carried marks where the predator had brushed against it, a stark reminder of how close the moment had come. Though physically unharmed, Eric's hands shook as he removed his gloves, his face pale from the shock. In the days that followed, experts reviewed his footage. They confirmed the estimate of a 15-foot Greenland shark, an animal rarely seen by divers at such proximity. While generally passive, scientists explained that their behavior can turn unpredictable. Their size, power, and natural curiosity make them capable of causing harm, even without exhibiting overt aggression. In the deep Arctic waters, encounters like this remain rare, but they highlight the risks associated with exploring such isolated regions. The aftermath left Eric deeply reflective. Although he continued his work, he often spoke of the fine line between research and danger, between admiration and survival. For him, the ice-cold waters of Svalbard would forever carry the memory of the massive creature that circled him in silence, testing the fragile balance between man and predator. On June 5, 2025, the waters off Maui, Hawaii looked calm from the surface, but beneath them lay strong currents and poor visibility. That morning, a specialized police diving team prepared for an underwater recovery operation. Among them was Detective Mark Rivera, a 37-year-old officer with over a decade of service. Born and raised on Oahu, Mark had built his career in law enforcement, focusing on marine operations. He had been part of numerous underwater searches and rescues, earning a reputation for his calm demeanor under pressure and skill in challenging conditions. His colleagues trusted him deeply, and he often took the lead during high-risk dives. Mark had joined 4 other divers that day, all of whom were trained to handle recovery work in Hawaii's unpredictable waters. Their mission was to search for evidence connected to an ongoing investigation involving a sunken vessel. The job was demanding, requiring precision and endurance in challenging conditions. Equipped with wetsuits, regulators, and recovery tools, the men descended carefully, spreading out along the reef as they scanned the wreckage. The underwater environment was harsh. Currents tugged at their bodies, shifting sand clouds across the seabed. Visibility was poor, making every movement slow and deliberate. The divers communicated with hand signals, marking their progress as they worked. Mark moved steadily, examining the scattered debris while adjusting his buoyancy to avoid stirring up more silt. Despite the effort, the team felt confident in their ability to complete the operation. Then the mood changed. From the edge of the gloom, a massive shape approached. A tiger shark, close to 12 feet in length, drifted out of the darkness. Drawn by the vibrations of the tools and the unfamiliar activity on the reef, it circled with unsettling intent. The divers froze for a moment, watching as the predator's striped body twisted around them. The first strike came suddenly. The shark lunged forward, jaws clamping onto Mark's leg with crushing force. The pressure tore through the neoprene and blood immediately clouded the water. Mark screamed into his regulator, his body convulsing as bubbles erupted around him. His hands flailed against the predator's mass, but its thrashing dragged him sideways in violent bursts. His partner reacted quickly, jabbing hard with a recovery pole at the shark's flank. The impact startled it only briefly, as the predator twisted again, shaking Mark with terrifying power. Other divers joined in, creating noise by slamming tools against metal and stone as they were desperate to distract the animal. The water churned with chaos, sand rising in clouds, bubbles bursting in all directions. Mark's pain was overwhelming, but he kept struggling, his training pushing him to fight for survival. His leg burned with deep lacerations as the shark continued its assault. For long, agonizing moments, the predator held on, refusing to release. The struggle raged beneath the surface as the predator twisted violently, its powerful tail whipping through the water. Mark's body jolted with every movement, streams of red clouding around him. His teammates did not stop, striking again and again with poles and tools, their bubbles rising fast in the dark water. The noise filled the reef, echoing in bursts that finally began to push the predator away. With a sudden wrench, the jaws opened and the enormous form drifted back into the gloom. Mark floated in shock, his body limp as his leg throbbed with searing pain. The wetsuit around his thigh and calf was shredded, long tears exposing deep wounds. His regulator hissed loudly as his breath came fast and uneven. The closest diver grabbed hold of his harness, signaling to the others that it was time to surface. Together they formed a protective circle, keeping eyes on the shadows below as they slowly ascended through the churning water. The ascent was tense. Every flicker in the haze felt like another approach. Every swirl of sand carried the fear that the predator might return. The divers kept close, their movements careful but steady. When they finally broke the surface, the team shouted for support, alerting the boat above. Within moments, strong arms hauled Mark out of the sea. Blood streamed across the deck as he collapsed, his face pale, but his eyes open. Emergency kits were rushed out and fabric was pressed hard against his injuries to slow the bleeding. The wounds were deep, jagged lacerations running along muscle and skin, but he was alive. His teammates stood over him, drenched and shaking from the encounter, their faces marked by exhaustion and disbelief. The boat sped toward shore, cutting through the waves with urgency as radios called ahead for medical teams. At the harbor, paramedics were waiting. Mark was lifted onto a stretcher, his body trembling as bandages soaked quickly with blood. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where surgeons worked for hours to close the wounds and repair damaged tissue. Despite the severity of his injuries, doctors confirmed that he would survive. His training, his teammates' actions, and the quick response of the rescue crew had saved his life. News of the incident spread quickly across Maui and beyond. Reports highlighted the risks faced by police divers who carried out missions in unpredictable conditions. Experts noted that tiger sharks are highly opportunistic, and underwater operations with tools and vibrations can trigger their curiosity or aggression. Officials reminded diving teams to remain alert and to adapt safety measures whenever working near reefs known for large predators. For Mark, recovery would be a long and difficult process. His leg bore deep scars, and the memory of that morning haunted him even more than the pain. The image of the striped predator, its jaws clamped on his body, remained vivid in his mind. Yet his survival stood as a testament to teamwork and resilience. For his colleagues, the encounter served as a poignant reminder of the risks they faced in their duty and of the fragile line between safety and disaster in the ocean's depths. On October 14, 2022, the wind swept across the coast of Gansbaai, South Africa, a place renowned worldwide as the center of great white shark tourism. That morning, a group of tourists and professionals gathered for a cage diving expedition, eager to experience the power of these predators up close. Among them was Daniel Fisher, a 35-year-old professional diver from Hamburg, Germany. Daniel had built a career in underwater photography, traveling to the world's oceans to capture rare images of marine life. His work had been published in magazines and featured in documentaries, earning him recognition for his fearless approach and technical skill. Daniel had always been drawn to sharks. From his teenage years, he studied them extensively, fascinated by their biology and misunderstood reputation. His goal was to capture images that showed both their beauty and their danger. For him, Gansbaai was a dream location, offering one of the highest chances of close encounters with great whites. With years of experience in deep-sea diving, coral reef exploration, and wreck diving, Daniel was confident in his ability to work safely, even in the presence of apex predators. That morning, the expedition set out in choppy seas. The crew secured the steel cage, lowering it carefully over the side of the boat. The divers prepared their gear, pulling on wetsuits, checking regulators, and readying cameras. Excitement mixed with nerves as they watched the water churn below. The area had a reputation for unpredictable encounters, but that was exactly what drew people like Daniel to it. Within minutes of the cage being secured, a massive shadow appeared beneath the surface. Rising with a surge of water, a 17-foot great white shark circled the vessel. Its dorsal fin sliced through the swell, its body twisting with powerful strokes as it approached the cage. The divers inside felt the thrill of the moment, gripping the bars and pointing their cameras at the scene. Daniel leaned out farther than the others, determined to get a close-up shot of the predator's eyes and teeth. His camera extended beyond the bars, dangling just inches from the open water. Focused on the shot, he distracted himself from the rules designed to keep divers safe. As the great white circled faster, its movements grew sharper, its body brushing close to the cage. Without warning, the predator lunged. Its massive jaws clamped onto Daniel's arm, the force bending steel and splintering metal. The cage shook violently as bubbles and blood burst into the water. Divers inside screamed through their regulators as the structure groaned under the attack. Daniel struggled, thrashing as the shark pulled with crushing strength, dragging him against the bars. Crew members on deck scrambled to raise the cage, ropes straining as the winch groaned. But the predator surged again, striking the cage with its full weight. The impact twisted the bars wider, tearing Daniel from his hold. The great white's force ripped Daniel free of the bars, pulling him downward into the swirling water. The cage swung violently, banging against the hull of the boat as the predator thrashed with its grip, locked tight. The water filled with foam and red clouds that spread quickly, blinding those still inside the cage. Divers pressed against the steel, their eyes wide as the scene unfolded before them in chaos. The shark surged again, dragging its prey deeper with terrifying speed. The crew above shouted warnings and pounded the surface with poles, trying to break the predator's focus. Metal clanged against metal as the winch hauled the cage upward, but the attack continued below. Within moments, Daniel's form was lost in the churn, his body spinning as the shark twisted in brutal arcs. The struggle lasted barely 2 minutes, yet every second seemed to stretch endlessly for those who watched. The predator finally released its grip, vanishing into the gloom with a flick of its massive tail. Daniel floated briefly before sinking beyond reach, the current pulling him away. Silence fell across the boat, broken only by the crash of waves against the hull and the hiss of regulators as the remaining divers surfaced in shock. The cage was pulled back aboard, its bars bent and warped from the force of the assault. Equipment hung twisted, cameras lost to the depths. The deck, usually buzzing with excitement after an encounter, stood frozen in horror. The survivors clutched the railings, their faces pale as they stared at the slick of blood spreading across the waves. Authorities were notified immediately, and patrol vessels were dispatched to search the surrounding area. Divers were ordered out of the water, and the trip was abandoned. Rescue efforts scoured the seas, but nothing more was found. By the time officials confirmed the details, it was clear the diver had not survived. The incident shook the Gansbai community. Cage diving was a major industry, drawing tourists from around the globe. Yet the event revealed the razor-thin line between controlled encounters and the raw danger of wild predators. Experts reviewed the footage and accounts, noting unusually aggressive behavior in the days leading up to the attack. They explained that strong currents, reduced prey, and seasonal changes could all increase risk. Out of respect for the loss, authorities suspended all cage diving tours in the area. Operators faced scrutiny, with questions raised about safety protocols and the positioning of divers. Many pointed to the importance of never leaning outside the bars, a rule designed to prevent exactly what had occurred. Daniel's decision to push for the perfect shot had cost him his life, leaving colleagues and loved ones devastated. For those who had been present, the memory of the steel bending, the screams beneath the surface, and the blood in the water would never fade. The ocean had claimed another life, reminding everyone that in the territory of the Great White, even the strongest cage could not guarantee safety. On August 9, 2024, the waters off Mauritius shimmered under the midday sun as a group of 8 tourists set sail on a catamaran excursion. Among them was Thomas Keller, a 41-year-old German traveler who had long dreamed of exploring the Indian Ocean. A seasoned adventurer, Thomas had spent years climbing mountains in Europe and hiking trails across South America, but he had always been drawn to the sea. He often traveled with small groups seeking experiences that pushed him beyond his comfort zone, and this trip was meant to be one more memory in his growing list of adventures. The catamaran carried both seasoned sailors and newcomers, with laughter and conversation filling the air as the vessel cut across the waves. The turquoise waters sparkled, and for most of the passengers, the day seemed perfect. Thomas leaned on the railing, soaking in the wide horizon, grateful for the chance to witness the raw beauty of Mauritius from the sea. The group included couples, friends, and solo travelers, all united by the thrill of sailing across open water. By afternoon, the weather began to shift. The once gentle winds grew sharp, sending ripples across the surface. The crew attempted to adjust the sails, but the gusts strengthened with alarming speed. Within minutes, the catamaran tilted sharply under the force. Shouts filled the air as the vessel heaved again, and then, in a violent surge, it overturned. Wood, gear, and supplies were scattered across the surface as the tourists plunged into the sea. The survivors clung desperately to floating debris and life jackets. The waves tossed them in every direction, pulling them away from the overturned hull. Panic set in as they tried to regroup, their voices breaking through the wind and water. Thomas gripped a broken plank, his heart racing as he was determined to stay afloat until help arrived. Then the surface broke with a sight that sent fear surging through every survivor. Dark dorsal fins cut across the waves. Oceanic whitetips, known for their persistence in open water, had been drawn by the splashing and the traces of blood from cuts and scrapes. The sharks circled closer, their sleek forms moving just beneath the surface. The first strike came without warning. One of the predators lunged at a man gripping a life jacket, its jaws locking onto his arm. He was yanked beneath the surface in a violent thrash, water foaming red as he kicked frantically. For an agonizing moment it seemed he would not reappear, but then he broke free, gasping, his arm torn and bleeding. Another predator struck at floating debris, ramming it hard enough to knock one survivor into deeper water. Screams echoed across the waves as the group thrashed, pulling one another back toward anything that floated. The circling fins only grew closer, cutting through the chaos with chilling patience. The fins carved tight circles around the scattered tourists, each pass drawing closer. The man who had been bitten clutched his torn arm against his chest, his face pale as waves carried him toward the others. Blood trailed from his wounds, staining the water and keeping the predators fixed on the group. Every splash seemed to pull the sharks back in, their blunt heads cutting through foam before disappearing again into the depths. One of the survivors was struck by a sudden surge as another predator rammed a broken piece of wood, flipping it aside. A woman who had clung to it was thrown into open water, her body spinning as she kicked desperately. The group shouted in panic, their arms stretching to pull her back before the sharks closed in. She managed to grab hold of a floating cushion, her breathing ragged as she pressed herself against it. For nearly 20 minutes the animals circled without rest. They brushed against legs, bumped debris, and made sudden lunges that sent fear surging through the group. Thomas held tight to his plank, his muscles burning from exhaustion. Each second felt stretched as if time itself had slowed, while the fins cut patterns around them with relentless patience. The survivors moved together, trying to form a loose cluster, knowing that straying even a few feet from the group could draw the predators closer. The sea became a mix of foam, shouts, and the sharp glint of dorsal fins rising and falling. Some of the sharks snapped at objects floating near the survivors, tearing at straps and splinters, their teeth shredding anything they could clamp onto. Each strike brought a new rush of fear as the group braced for another attack. Rescue finally came when nearby motorboats, alerted by distress signals, closed in on the scene. Crew members leaned over the sides, striking the water with poles and paddles to drive the predators back. Engines roared, sending vibrations through the sea that broke the rhythm of the circling fins. One by one, the survivors were hauled aboard, their bodies battered, bruised, and bleeding from cuts. The man who had been bitten was lifted carefully, his arm wrapped tight in cloth to slow the bleeding. When the last survivor was pulled onto the deck, the crew wasted no time turning away from the sight. The slick of blood trailed behind them as the fins faded back into the open sea, the animals unwilling to follow once the noise and motion of the boats dominated the surface. The passengers collapsed onto the floor, their limbs shaking from cold, exhaustion, and shock. Doctors later treated deep cuts, bruising, and torn skin from both the bite and the scrapes caused by debris. No one had been killed, but the physical and emotional toll was immense. Experts explained that oceanic whitetips are highly opportunistic, and in cases of shipwrecks or overturned boats, they are among the most dangerous species because of their persistence. For the 8 who endured that afternoon, the memory of fins slicing around them in endless circles would remain long after their bodies had healed. On August 12, 2025, the bright summer sun hung over the Algarve coast of Portugal, casting a golden light across the calm Atlantic waters. Tourists filled the beaches, but farther out, thrill-seekers tested themselves against the sea. Among them was Adrian Costa, a 26-year-old athlete known to his friends for his daring nature and love of extreme water sports. Born in Lisbon, Adrian had spent his childhood near the ocean, learning to surf, dive, and handle boats before most of his peers. His adventurous spirit led him into kneeboarding, a sport that combined the speed of a motorboat with the balance and agility of board riding. For him, it was not just a pastime, but a way to challenge limits and capture moments of adrenaline. Adrian was no stranger to risk. After completing his studies in marine biology, he dedicated a significant portion of his time to exploring ocean ecosystems. His knowledge of the sea only deepened his respect for it. Yet he believed that calculated risks brought him closer to the raw forces of nature. The Algarve was his favorite location, where clear skies and blue waters gave the perfect stage for pushing his skills further. That morning, Adrian set out with a group of friends who shared his passion for the subject. They rented a small speedboat and prepared their boards, joking and cheering as they took turns performing tricks near floating buoys. The sea was calm, a deceptive stillness hiding what lay below. When his turn came, Adrian tightened his grip on the tow rope and balanced on his kneeboard, ready to perform daring spins across the surface. As the boat accelerated, the board skimmed gracefully, cutting across ripples with speed. Adrian leaned into turns, lifting sprays of salt water into the air. He performed spins near the markers, pushing closer each time, drawing cheers from the spectators on the boat. For him, the water was alive beneath his board, a place of energy and control. But under the surface, unseen, something else was drawn to the vibrations and splashes. From the depths, a shadow approached with alarming speed. A 10-foot short-fin mako shark, one of the fastest predators in the ocean, surged upward. The moment was sudden and brutal. Its jaws clamped hard onto Adrian's lower leg, tearing through wetsuit and skin with terrifying force. The impact sent him crashing off the board, his body slamming into the water as the rope slipped from his grasp. Adrian thrashed violently, the shock of pain mixing with panic as red streaks swirled around him. His heart pounded as he kicked wildly, trying to break free from the predator's grip. The board floated nearby, rocking uselessly in the disturbed water. The shark released him but did not retreat. It circled aggressively, snapping at the board, and at every splash, its speed slicing through the waves. On the boat, his friends screamed and splashed with paddles, trying to distract the predator. Their frantic movements echoed across the sea, buying precious moments as Adrian fought to stay afloat. Every second stretched into an eternity, the fin slicing closer each time it turned. The shark's circles tightened as it darted back toward the flailing rider, snapping at the board and slicing through the red-tinted foam. Adrian's body ached. His leg was torn and weak, but survival forced him to kick hard and reach for the floating board. His fingers gripped its edge as the predator rushed past again, its powerful body cutting a wake that rocked him violently. Each pass brought the animal closer, its jaws opening wide before closing with a thunderous snap that echoed through the water. The small speedboat maneuvered quickly, its engine roaring as it cut across the waves toward him. The crew pounded the surface with paddles, sending noise and splashes across the area. The predator twisted away for an instant, distracted by the racket, before turning back with renewed focus. Adrian clung desperately to the board, pulling himself halfway on as his arms shook from exhaustion. Blood continued to flow from his leg, clouding the water around him and fueling the animal's persistence. The shark struck again, ramming the board and nearly flipping it. Adrian was thrown sideways, his body half submerged as he scrambled to hold on. The predator bit into the board's edge, tearing away foam and plastic, its teeth leaving deep grooves as fragments floated to the surface. With each snap, the situation grew more dire, and his strength faded. In a final coordinated effort, the boat crew edged close enough for two riders to reach out. One splashed furiously with a rope, while another extended a pole, striking the water near the fin. The predator spun, startled by the sudden noise, its body twisting away with a powerful flick of its tail. In that brief moment, Adrian was pulled across the side of the vessel, collapsing onto the deck with a heavy thud. His face was pale, his chest heaving with ragged breaths as seawater streamed from his wetsuit. The group pressed cloth against his leg, the deep lacerations gaping and swollen. Bruises covered his body from the struggle, and blood continued to seep through makeshift bandages. The boat sped back toward the coast, its bow cutting clean lines across the sea as the dorsal fin disappeared behind them. Relief washed over the group, but silence lingered, broken only by the hum of the engine and the sound of Adrian's shallow breathing. At the marina, medical crews rushed him into an ambulance. Surgeons later confirmed multiple deep cuts along his lower leg, with muscle damage but no loss of bone. His survival was credited to the fast reaction of his companions and the distraction efforts that kept the predator from striking again. The wounds required surgery and months of rehabilitation, but he was alive. News of the attack spread across the Algarve, shocking both locals and visitors. Experts explained that short-fin makos are among the fastest sharks, capable of bursts of speed that make sudden encounters particularly dangerous. They are drawn to rapid movement and unusual splashing, behaviors common in water sports like kneeboarding. For Adrian, the experience left more than scars. His passion for the ocean remained, but the memory of teeth tearing through the board and the helplessness of floating in bloodied water followed him long after his body healed. The encounter became a reminder that the sea, however beautiful, holds dangers that demand respect from even the most skilled riders.